Assalamu alaikum, my dear brothers and sisters in Islam. Today we'll be reading the 48th part of Prophet Muhammad's role in Islam by Jalal al-Abu Fud. Isnad 48. Isnad is a superb scientific method with which the Muslim nation can and did preserve the letter and meaning of Islam's two resources, the Quran and Sunnah. To preserve the integrity of the Sunnah and Quran's practical bayan, Muslim scholars devised an outstanding and scientifically precise method of protecting the prophetic tradition from corruption. It is called the method of Isnad, meaning using chains of narrators to establish the validity or lack thereof of any statement or action attributed to the Prophet. Here's an exemplary example. Imam Malik ibn Anas, who collected al-Muwatta, was a teacher of Imam Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, who collected a Musnad that carries his name. Al-Shafi'i was the teacher of Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal, who collected the famous hadith collection simply known as al-Musnad. All three of these imams were major scholars of Islam, fiqh, and other Islamic aspects. It should be noted that Musnad shares the same root word as Isnad. Example to Isnad. Here is a rare hadith narration that Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal collected in his Musnad, hadith number 5597. This hadith is also found in Al-Muwatta, the Imam Malik. Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal said, Muhammad ibn Idris al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah, narrated to us, saying, Malik ibn Anas reported to us from Nafi, from Abdullah ibn Umar, that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, let not some of you spoil the sale of others. This hadith prohibits spoiling the business transaction of others, such as by saying to the buyer, cancel the deal you had with so-and-so, and I will give you the same product for a cheaper price, or by saying, I will give you a better product than the one you are buying from so-and-so, but for the same price. In the example provided from here, Al-Musnad, Imam Ahmed narrated this hadith from Imam Shafi'i, his teacher, who narrated the hadith from Imam Malik, his teacher. Imam Malik reported this hadith by mentioning the name of his teacher, Nafi, Abdullah ibn Umar's famous student, and Nafi mentioned the name of his teacher, Abdullah ibn Umar, the Prophet's companion who narrated the Prophet's statement. Malik was from the third generation of Islam. Only two narrators were between him and the Prophet in many of his hadiths he collected. It should be noted that Imam Malik verbally reported the portion of the hadith quoted here using two different chains of narrators, including the one from Nafi, from Abdullah ibn Umar. In addition, other hadith collectors such as Bukhari, Muslim, An-Nasa'i, Abu Dawood, Ahmed's Musnad, and so forth also collected the portion of hadith quoted here through Malik. Some of them reported both of Malik's chains of narrations. Imam Malik himself reported the two different chains of narrators from the portion of the hadith under discussion in his own Al-Muwatta. There are literally hundreds of chains of narrators connected in a similar manner as Malik, Shafi'i, Ahmed are connected. After a hadith collector transmits his narration, using the chains of narrators through which he obtained hadith narrations, hadith scholars analyze every hadith chain of narrators, verifying the trustworthiness of every narrator by researching the narrator's history, conduct, and how contemporary scholars portrayed his or her character, state of mind, and reliability. Hadith scholars also verified the continuity of every chain of narrators until it reached the Prophet ﷺ, to uncover any missing name in the chain that might disrupt its continuity. Only then, when a chain of narrators is held as acceptable, and the text it reports is found accurate, and both are verified as being free from hidden or apparent defects, will a hadith be accepted as authentic. In Islam, weak and fabricated hadiths are rejected. In his introduction to his Sahih, Imam Muslim emphasized the necessity of reporting only authentic hadiths. Hadith reports do not withstand the rigors of methods of Isnad are rejected if they do not have verifiable, continuous, and sound chains of narrations that are free from any hidden or apparent defects. For various reasons, many people have invented statements and reports and attributed them to the Prophet ﷺ. However, hadith scholars have always been able to as easily and skillfully expose and refute invented statements and reports by relying on Isnad and by studying every hadith context as whether to accept or reject various narrations. Even when literacy became widespread in the Muslim world, scholars of early and successive Muslim generations relied on memory to preserve hadith narration, as well as compiling and transcribing hadith on a massive professional scale. Just like the Quran and the Sunnah was preserved through two indigenous methods that separately and jointly preserves its integrity, accuracy, and continuity, scribing hadith narrations by recording hadith reports along with the chains of narrators reporting them, and preserving hadith reports through memorizing them and transmitting them from memory along with the chains of narrators reporting them. For instance, Imam Ahmed ibn Hanbal memorized around 2 million narrations of the prophetic hadith and statements and religious verdicts of the Prophet's companions and the two successive generations. The narrations Ahmed memorized include the chains of narrators. However, these are not 2 million different hadiths said by the Prophet ﷺ. They include various narrations reporting the same hadith using different chains of narrators, so as to strengthen the various texts if applicable. They also include the fatwa or religious opinions of the Prophet's companions and the two successive generations, as well as weak hadiths. There are more than 300 major hadith collections. As stated before, hadith collections contain repetitions of various prophetic statements and actions contained in other books of hadith by using various independent or repetitive chains of narrators. They also contain statements from the Prophet's companions and the successive generations of scholars with regards to various aspects of Islam. They also include weak and unsubstantiated narrations. However, while hadith narrations found in various hadith collections are repetitive, the entire Sunnah is found in them collectively and answers any question regarding the Islamic religion that any person may have. 49th. Sahih al-Bukhari, example of Sunnah collections. 1 month before he died, Imam Bukhari said, I collect hadith from 1,080 men, teachers. Every one of them is a narrator of hadith. Imam Bukhari was born in Bukhara, in today's Uzbekistan, 194 years after the Prophet's Hijrah, which occurred in 623 CE. Bukhara was conquered by the great Muslim leader Qutayba ibn Muslim in the 90th year of Hijrah, which coincided with the year 708 CE. Thus, when Imam al-Bukhari was born, Bukhara had already been an Islamic city for more than 100 years. It was also a center for Islamic knowledge, such as knowledge of hadith. Numerous companions and tabi'un scholars had migrated to and resided in the new Islamic areas, thus transferring knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah to the farthest part of the Islamic world. Travel between Islamic areas was safe, affordable, exciting, beneficial, and quite widespread. At the early age of 17, Imam Bukhari had traveled to major cities of the Muslim world. Bukhari's biography. His name was Muhammad ibn Ismail ibn Ibrahim ibn Mughira ibn Bardizbah, which means the farmer. Al-Mughira, who used to be a Mujusi, fire worshipper, became Muslim during the reign of Al-Imam al-Jurfi, governor of Bukhara. Al-Bukhari's kunya, or title, is Abu Abdullah. As Al-Bukhari himself reported, his father Ismail ibn Ibrahim sought knowledge of hadith. Imam ad-Dahabi, a major Muslim scholar and historian, said that Al-Bukhari said, My father heard from Malik ibn Anas, saw Hamad ibn Zayd, and shook both hands of Abdullah ibn Mubarak. The three scholars mentioned here are some of the most respectable scholars of Islam, especially in the knowledge of hadith. Imam Muhammad ibn Abi Hatim reported that he asked Al-Bukhari about how he started learning knowledge, and Al-Bukhari replied by saying, I was made by Allah to like memorizing hadith when I was in Kutab. When asked how old he was then, he said 10 years old or younger. The Kutab is a simple school where young Muslim children attend classes to learn basic Arabic, math, the proper method of reciting Quran, and learn to memorize Quran. Often young children would memorize the entire Quran at an early age, even before they reach the age of 10. This method of teaching Quran still thrives today in various parts of the Islamic world. Al-Bukhari said, When I was 16 years of age, I had already memorized the book of Abdullah ibn al-Mubarak and Waqi ibn al-Jarrah, then traveled to Mecca with my mother and Ahmed, my brother. After I made Hajj, my brother traveled back with my mother, and I remained behind, seeking knowledge of hadith. Al-Bukhari had also heard hadith narrations in Bukhara before he traveled to Mecca. As stated, Al-Bukhari had numerous teachers with whom he learned all aspects of Islamic knowledge, from whom he heard hadith narrations. It is not possible to list all of Bukhari's shuyukh, teachers here. A partial list will be sufficient. Only one teacher will be mentioned from some of the areas where Bukhari sought the knowledge of hadith. In Balkh, today's Afghanistan, Bukhari heard hadith narrations from Makki ibn Ibrahim. In Marwa, today's Turkmenistan, he heard hadith from Ali ibn Hassan ibn Shaqiq. In Naysabura, Persia, from Yahya ibn Hayya. In Ra'i, today's Persia, from Ibrahim ibn Musa. In Baghdad, Iraq, from Suraj ibn an-Nu'man. In Basra, Iraq, from Ad-Dahak ibn Makhlad, also known as Abu Asim al-Nabil. In Kufa, Iraq, from Talq ibn Ghanam. In Mecca, Hijaz, from Abdullah ibn al-Zubair al-Humaydi. In Medina, Hijaz, from Abdullah Aziz al-Uwaisi. In Egypt, from Sa'id ibn Abi Maryam. In Ash-Sham, from Ali ibn Ayyash, and so forth. Bukhari learned with more than 1,000 teachers. This list is very brief compared to the entire list of teachers with whom Bukhari learned hadith and other aspects of Islamic knowledge. Every one of Bukhari's teachers had a variable biography collected in books of Rijal, which focus on male and female narrators of hadith. All of Bukhari's listed teachers, and as stated, only a very small number of Bukhari's teachers is mentioned here, are well-known narrators with trustworthiness, state of mind, character, and power memory can be verified, relying on that which the contemporary scholars and students said about them. In addition to the books they wrote and the legacy they left behind, the biography of every one of these teachers also includes mention of their teachers and students, and their teachers and students, and so forth. The chains continues expanding in this manner the closer or farther Muslims get to the time of the Prophet ﷺ and his companions. A unique, distinct Islamic knowledge called Ilm al-Rijal, knowledge of men, was developed for the purpose of studying the trustworthiness of narrators of hadith, male and female. Imam Sham ad-Din ad-Dahabi, one of the major Muslim scholars of hadith and Islamic history, continues his biography in al-Bukhari by saying that among all of Bukhari's teachers who report hadith from at-Tabi'in, second generation of Islam, were Abu Asim al-Nabil, Makki ibn Ibrahim, Abu al-Mughira, Abu Qudus ibn Hajjaj, among others. Consequently, in some of the hadith narrations al-Bukhari collected, there were only 3 people between him and the Prophet of Allah ﷺ. This type of chain of narrators is called Thulaythiyah, literally means 3. Numerous scholars collected hadith from al-Bukhari, such as these famous collectors of hadith: Muslim ibn Hajjaj al-Qurayshi, Qushayri, Muhammad ibn Isa al-Tirmidhi, Abu Hatim al-Razi, Abu Bakr ibn Abi ad-Dunya, Abu Bakr ibn Abi Asim, Abu Bakr ibn Khuzaymah, among others. The scholars mentioned here are also major hadith collectors in their own right. Imam al-Dahabi said that his teacher Imam Abu al-Hajjaj Mizi collected the names of al-Bukhari's teachers and students in a volume by itself. Imam al-Dahabi reported that 90,000 students heard Sahih al-Bukhari being recited to them. Many of these students transmitted al-Bukhari's entire Sahih. Al-Bukhari said that it took him 16 years to finish collecting his Sahih. He did not add a hadith to the Sunnah to the Sahih until after washing by making ghusl, then performing a 2-rakah prayer. Bukhari said that he only included authentic hadiths in his Sahih. He also said that he left out other authentic hadiths so the book would not become larger in size. Al-Bukhari memorized more than 600,000 narrations, and Imam Abu Dahabi added that among the narrations Al-Bukhari memorized were 200,000 authentic narrations. Imam Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani said that scholars of hadith in Baghdad tested al-Bukhari's memory by asking 10 men to each recite 10 hadith narrations to al-Bukhari. However, the chains of narrators and texts for all 100 hadiths were intentionally switched. After the 10 men finished reciting all of the 100 hadiths assigned to them, Bukhari repeated every hadith they recited in the order it was recited to the man who recited it. He then recited to each of the 10 men the correct text and chain of narrators for the hadiths they recited, one hadith at a time. The audience was astonished and attested and admitted to al-Bukhari's immense memorizing ability. Al-Jami' al-Sahih. Al-Jami' al-Sahih, also known as Sahih al-Bukhari, is al-Bukhari's famous collection of hadith, authentic hadiths. It comprises more than 4,000 different hadiths, close to 7,600 hadiths when repeated hadiths are counted. As stated, Al-Jami' al-Sahih was taught to more than 90,000 people who heard the collection, hadith by hadith, narrated them to al-Bukhari himself. During that era, hadith scholars used to teach hadith narrations in designated open areas to students who would gather by the thousands to hear hadith narrations. Men were assigned to loudly repeat the statements they heard from the teacher to people sitting in the back rows so they could hear clearly. Example of Bukhari's hadith narrations. This is an example of Bukhari's narration. The entire chain of narration from the hadith is mentioned in Arabic and English, followed by a brief commentary on the narration of the hadith. In this hadith, which is hadith number 106, there are only 3 narrators between Bukhari and the Prophet of Allah. Al-Bukhari said, Makki ibn Ibrahim narrated to us by saying, Yazid ibn Abi Ubaid narrated to us that Salama said, I heard the Prophet say, He who has ascribed to me a statement that I did not say, let him assume his assured seat in the hellfire. The 4 narrators of this hadith are Muhammad ibn Ismail al-Bukhari, Makki ibn Ibrahim, Yazid ibn Abi Ubaydah, Salama ibn al-Aqwa. The Prophet, and he was Yazid's teacher and the Prophet's close companion. According to Imam al-Dahabi, Salama was in his 90s when he died. Yazid ibn Abi Abdullah, a trustworthy narrator of hadiths, was one of Salama's close associates and young pupils. Yazid lived long after Salama and benefited Muslims from his narrations from Salama. Makki ibn Ibrahim, a trustworthy scholar of hadith, is Yazid ibn Abi Uyba's student, and al-Bukhari's teacher in this hadith. Knowledge of hadith survived and still exists in the present time through the ongoing scientific movement to study texts of hadiths and their chains of narrators to determine authentic hadiths and to expose weak and fabricated ones. Since all of the texts and chains of narrators necessary to transmit the Prophet's hadith statements were recorded in writing in the early Islamic era, scholars of later generations concentrated on studying and analyzing the texts and the chains of narrators that were already recorded in earlier books. Consequently, even in the present time, this knowledge is available to scholars and students of knowledge who can still study hadith narrations and conduct scientific analysis of their texts and chains of narrators to determine authenticity or lack of it. This scientific effort relies heavily on the beneficial work of early Muslim scholars who recorded their findings in books and manuscripts. This is how the Prophet's Sunnah was protected, its knowledge accurately inherited from one generation to the next generation until it reached as fresh and viable as the day Allah's Prophet spoke it, practiced it, and explained it. We'll be stopping here for today. Inshallah, we'll continue on to the 50th part next time. Ma'assalam, my dear brothers and sisters around the world.